Now, we are following the fallout around the world to the death of North Korea's so-called dear leader Kim Jong-il. Ambassador Christopher Hill is the former head of the American delegation to the six-party talks aimed at resolving the North Korean nuclear crisis. He also served as the US ambassador to South Korea from 2004 to 2005.
And Ambassador Hill joins us now from Colorado via webcam. Ambassador Hill, very pleased you could join us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Some analysts believe we are now entering a particularly dangerous period because of Kim Jong-il's death. Do you agree with that, and if so, why?
Well, first of all, this is only the second succession that North Korea has had since World War II. The first succession was one where Kim Jong-il was led around by his father for some 20 years, so everyone kind of knew what was going to happen. Kim Jong-un sort of appeared on the stage about a year ago, and it's sort of unclear. We don't know very much about him, and frankly, neither do the North Korean people. So it's very unclear how this is all going to proceed. You know, they have a sort of regent there, a guy named Chung Song-taek, who is a kind of wily bureaucrat, who's worked with Kim Jong-il. He's his brother-in-law. But whether he wants to be a rival to Kim Jong-un or a mentor is yet to be seen. So it's quite an interesting period.
We know that people such as Jim Walsh from MIT have been involved in recent months in meeting several North Korean delegations in behind-the-scenes meetings. So following on from what you've just said, what have we learned as a result of those meetings about the potential power plays that could be played out in Pyongyang now?
What we're seeing really, and this has been especially pronounced since about '08 when Kim Jong-il became Kim Jong very ill. And what it is the military seems to be playing a bigger role, the Korea People's Army. So one of the big questions then is, what is the military's comfort level with Kim Jong-un, and who is really calling the shots? I think we have a kind of hybrid system now, sort of a junta/cult. And there are a lot of people in Pyongyang who'd like to keep this cult going. I mean, after all, Kim Jong-il created a sort of vast, what was called nomenclatura in the old days of the communist bloc, that is, people were very much beholden to the system. Yeah. So that is very much going on. And so for those people, they'd like this Kim family dynasty to continue.
But is it possible then that that Stalinist cult of personality that he established and his father established before him, that it potentially starts to wane with his death and doesn't carry on through the family?
You know, it was less pronounced with Kim Jong-il. I mean, we saw him in these sort of comical scenes of these funny shoes he'd wear and funny hairdo, but I don't think he was particularly beloved by the North Korean people. So there's clearly an effort to inculcate this notion of him being a charismatic figure. You know, a few looks at Kim Jong-un would have you hard-pressed to describe him in charismatic terms. There's one thing, though, that's going in his favor, which is he looks a little like his grandfather. And so let's see if they try to play that out, the notion of the grandson of Kim Il-sung. So it's going to be tough.
If he doesn't command that authority in that respect, then always in these situations something rushes in to fill that vacuum. Could it, as our initial discussion traversed, could that rushing into the vacuum be the military?
Well, as long as we're prepared to say we're just speculating here, because there's no evidence for anything at this point.
Sure.
I think it could be a couple of possibilities. As I mentioned, we have a military that is more assertive, and we have a situation where, ironically, it is the party that is withered away, not the government or state structure. So I think you could start seeing a more visible military as they grapple and have to grapple with these difficult problems. So that might be one scenario where Kim Jong-un, they might use him as kind of a figurehead, but the military really runs the place. Another possibility is this Chung Song-taek, who's he's had his ups and downs. He's been banished a couple of times, sort of on in internal exile. But he's obviously a very wily guy who has a lot of relationships. And so you might see a situation where he finally steps in and they kind of put the Kim Jong-un project aside for another time. So hard to tell at this point.
Ambassador Hill, I've read some reports that say that Kim Jong-il made several visits to Beijing recently, potentially looking at China as a model for economic reform. Now, is that just hopeful Western speculation, or is there something to that?
I think it's kind of hopeful Chinese speculation. I mean, I think the Chinese have always thought if they could interest him and somehow the Chinese model, that he'd become a more reasonable guy and, we could work with him on these things. I think the trouble with the Chinese model is as if North Korean people really see what's out there, they won't want to stay in North Korea, unlike the Chinese people who simply want to make China a better place. So I think there are real limits to the China model for North Korea. But nonetheless, that is very much what China would like to see. And they've wined and dined him. They've taken him to all these fancy factories. They've shown him all the tall buildings of Shanghai, etc. But I do have the sense that maybe it's a little wishful thinking.
And Ambassador Hill, just finally, what's the nuclear threat that North Korea poses at the moment?
Well, it's a very real threat. They have taken plutonium and put it together with a device and exploded it underground. They also have some missiles that are pretty competently made. The issue is if they could take one of these nuclear devices and put it on a missile and fire the missile off, we have a very, very big problem. There is no sense or no evidence, I should say, that they've done this as yet, but there's every reason to believe that they're trying to do this. And that is a very big concern. The other big concern, of course, is that they've had this clandestine uranium enrichment program. And if they start enriching uranium, the trouble with uranium enrichment programs is once you're there with highly enriched uranium, you can do it very quickly. Yeah. Plutonium takes a long time. And frankly, thanks to our negotiations, plutonium, which is the material they have already for making bombs, there's a limit. They're not going to make any more of that. But uranium enrichment is another story.
Ambassador Hill, I actually can't let you go without us really acknowledging the incredibly hard life of the people of North Korea. There are people that's so little discussed and little acknowledged around the world. So it's important that we paint a picture of that, I think, finally this morning. Just how bad is life in that country for those people?
It really is appalling. You know, when you go to Pyongyang, you see all these tall buildings. You don't see a lot of people, but the people you see certainly don't look malnourished or in, wearing rags or anything. But I had the opportunity once to go out to the Yongbyon nuclear reactor, and incredibly enough, my North Korean minders took the wrong dirt road, and so we ended up in the middle of nowhere. I remember the sort of absurd sight of these North Korean drivers all arguing with each other about which road to take to the nuclear reactor. And so we're in a small village in North Korea and looking around and seeing the abject poverty there, seeing the people in clothes that were really not adequate to the weather conditions, and seeing people carrying firewood, this sort of thing. I mean, we are talking about Koreans. I mean, just a few kilometers south of there, you're seeing one of the most vibrant societies in the world. So the process of turning Koreans into paupers is quite a full-time job, and that's something that this Kim dynasty has indeed mastered.
Yep, some achievement, huh? Ambassador Hill, really good to talk to you today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Well, now that Christopher Hill is cracking gags about Kim Jong being ill, I think it's open season. I take my cue from him.
Yes, if Ambassador Hill's going to say that. But I'm really glad he spent some time there just painting a picture of the life that North Koreans actually lead. We focus a great deal on the nuclear threat and on the craziness of the leaders there. But there are children, there are women, there are men, there are young people who have absolutely no opportunity for any real kind of life. And it's important that as much as we can with that secretive nation that we try and acknowledge it. So great to have him on the show today.